Welcome to 5 Good Questions. I'm your host, Jake Taylor. Our guest today is David Collum. David is a professor of chemistry and chemical biology and department chair at Cornell University. He specializes in organometallic chemistry with a particular expertise in the organic chemistry of lithium. David is an avid student of markets, economics, and geopolitics. Every year, he writes a fantastic year in review piece, so let's ask him 5 good questions about 2015. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. My guest today is David Collum. Hey, Dave, thanks for taking a chance to chat with us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So normally we have authors on this show, and I'm making a special exception because every year Dave writes a year in review piece that is one of my favorite reads of the year. It comes out around Christmas time, and it's almost like my little Christmas present, I feel like, a lot of times. So, and I mean, really the whole point of the show is to encourage long form reading. So, and his year in review is plenty long, which, you know, I'm amazed that he writes it still, to tell you the truth. But the name of the year in review piece is Scenic Vistas from Mount Stupid, and which is I thought a really clever name. And do you want to just walk us through how you came up with that name?
Yeah, so I've been doing this for about must be 7-8 years. Started out as just notes to myself, morphed into a summary at the end of the year for a bunch of acquaintances, I call them, people I talk to electronically. Then one year, the hit count went from a couple hundred to quite a handful of thousand, and then one year I decided to write it seriously, and it got very large, and so now it goes over to Zerohedge, places like that. The Mount Stupid analogy is that this year, more than any other year, as the year proceeded, I became more and more aware that I didn't know what I was doing, and in previous years, I could see the narratives, I could see the plot lines, I could see things emerge. I thought I could explain why the Saudis smashed the oil industry. It all seemed to make sense. This year, I just couldn't make sense of it. You know, Greece went wild and then disappeared, and the Middle East blew up. And, you know, anyone who claims to understand the Middle East is certainly lying. And there's this graphic, as you describe it, where it's your willingness to pontificate versus your knowledge. And there's this big hump right at the beginning where a relatively ignorant person is happy to talk. And then the more you know, the less you're willing to talk. And I realized I was probably sitting right on top of Mount Stupid, looking over the other side. And so my confusion was captured by that graphic. There's some, I spend the whole year watching for funny things like that. So by the time I'm done, I have a bunch.
Yeah, I love the analogy. Let's jump right in to question number 1. What do you think the 3 biggest events to you of 2015 were? And maybe you have to go back for the last couple of years just to, because these things take time to play out, obviously. But what do you think that will really impact 2016?
I think potentially the largest one. One year, I guess it was 2 years, and I lose track. Cyprus was the big event. And the reason I picked Cyprus, most of the people who know me don't know anything about Cyprus, right? But that was the year that they basically stole all Cyprus's money. And it was a beta test for further banking confiscations. And so Cyprus to me was huge that year. This year, I think, and I underestimated it for quite a while, but I think the refugee problem in Europe is probably a monster. And there's already reports of violence, and there's going to be nationalism. And boy, when Europe gets like that, we know what happens next. That would be the biggie, I think. The Middle East certainly is looking like a mess now. If someone were to say, "Wow, what a black swan," I'd say you're an idiot. Anyone who thinks that violence in the Middle East is a black swan doesn't understand the meaning of the term. The second thing is, it started last year when the Saudis smacked the oil industry quite intentionally, and I thought I understood it, but and I think it was in cahoots with us, actually. That's my suspicion, actually. Whoever thought of it was not looking at the consequence to the entire energy industry. So as we're stressing to get to a greater energy independence, we managed to destroy the very industry that was hopefully going to get us there. And so that then morphs into, I think, the third issue. Now, they all connect together, so to call things events, I don't believe in any single event short of a nuke as being an event, but the collapse of the bond market, I believe, has started I don't know where it'll end, but the high yield bonds are going very, very quickly. And they started, I think, with the collapse of the high yield energy bonds, so-called junk bonds. But once you start selling off bonds, once you start selling off any major asset in a portfolio, then you start selling off the portfolio and you start selling off things that are not bad. And then the contagion kicks in. You start saying, well, now we're not selling junk bonds anymore. We're selling real bonds because redemptions are killing us. And the system deleverages, you're going to end up with a mess. So I would have to say the energy collapse, number 2, bond market collapse on its heels, number 3, those things, I've been watching for them for a very long time, knowing they would come. The triggers are never the causes, but they certainly are triggers. Someone lit a match near the fuel, right?
Right. Yeah, the refugee crisis I find to be really interesting with when you have, how many thousands of 20-year-old.
I think it's millions, actually.
Millions of 20-year-old males with no jobs and no real prospects and nothing better to do than cause trouble. I mean, that's how a lot of problems have started historically.
They left a country in haste. This is not like Ellis Island, where they said, I want a better life. These guys left in haste, and they left countries that we bombed, right? And Syria is maybe there's people who are going to disagree, but Syria is a direct consequence of our interventionism. And I'm not a left-wing tree-hugging, I voted for Reagan, but we have gone way out of our way to mess up Syria, and now we've done it. And now Germany's filled with Syrians and related peoples, and they're mad, they're hopeless. It's got to be getting pretty cold in Germany right now. They don't have homes. And rumors of rape and pillaging, and for all we know, it's propaganda, but propaganda is what starts messes in Europe, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. So question number 2, this is the 7th year in review, 7th or 8th that you've produced. What have you learned over that time? And you're doing this incredible amount of information synthesis over the course of the year. How have you come to dread December yet because you have to write all this up, or what's your work process?
Well, so there are times where I fear December. Actually, not December, it's actually November. So it's kind of a year in review in which I capture about 10 months. Yeah. And then I'm so busy. We could have nukes in December and I wouldn't know they went off, right? So the process is, and this year, every year I think, why do I do this and never again? And it's like an exorcism, right? Nearly killed by it. So it's 100 single-spaced pages, right? To do that in short notice is hard to do. This year I had the epiphany that I know why I do it. And that is because I read about what's going on in the world. And if I were not reading in the context of trying to formulate a narrative, then it would be purposeless reading and there would be no structure to hang the ideas off of. And it's, I think, really funny. And so it also gives me a structure as I'm going through life. I feel like Seinfeld or something, and he sees something funny and he writes it down, I write it down. And so by the end of the year, when I create this thing, I work at nights in November and I bang out the chapters. And then in the editing is when it picks up its personality, as most writers will admit. And then by the end, I've managed a way to insult pretty much everyone in the world with some sort of snotty ass comment. And then what happens is I say, God, should I keep doing this? And then my email box fills up with, solicitations from guys like you, and you just can't fathom the people who contact me and say, I just had to reach out. And boy, we're all driven by ego, and that does it for me.
I feel like this show is a little bit of the same thing. Like, you slave over it. Sometimes you wonder why you're doing it. But then for me, reading all the books of the authors, I'm reading at a much more, capturing the information level, because I know I need to ask a good question about it, or 5 good questions, hopefully.
Like knowing there's a final exam.
Yeah, exactly. And then also the serendipity that it creates, where you just I meet people and talk to them that I never would have. That I really like inviting serendipity in my life that way. So let's see. Let's go to question number 3. How did you get started in this? And I guess you kind of covered that a little bit, but what insight has being an organic chemistry professor at Cornell given you into the financial markets?
Well, it's given me insight, and it gives me access. And the insight, so when I was young, I was trained to be what's called a synthetic organic chemist, and I got very lucky in grad school, phenomenally successful in grad school due to serendipity. And I found myself interviewing for jobs at the ripe old age of 24 as a chemist, and I switched fields as a result of these interviews. I went into a field for which I was completely ignorant, and over decades, this new field offered unbelievable amounts of serendipity, such that almost nothing that we study, even to this day, was predicted by the experts. And so now when I look at the markets, I don't trust experts. And so I can look at, I don't think it's an arrogance, although it's probably an emergent arrogance, but I can look at a dozen central bankers who tell me the same thing, and I can say, you guys are idiots. You don't understand. And I think Bernanke doesn't understand the Depression. How could an academic chemist think that? But what it does is it allows me to not get stuck in their memes, their train of thought. And once in a while in the year in review, I write about something. Like one year I wrote about the Roth IRA. The Roth IRA has a humongous mathematical hole in it that no one, to the best I can tell, is writing about it. You should not use a Roth IRA, in my opinion. And you should never, ever, ever roll a big chunk of money over to a Roth IRA. It's a huge math problem. And I wrote about that. And then I gave a talk in Vegas to 1,000 people on it, and no one shot it down. So it comes to me. No one could do that unless they were willing to believe the whole world is wrong. And so I have that capacity. I think I process data pretty well. I think I tell a pretty good narrative. And so chemistry helps me there. By the way, this stuff also helps chemistry. And I was recently reading something where someone said you can't be a good investor unless you're reading very broadly. It's not about reading about markets and finance. It's broadly. And so I read about neuropsychology and neuroplasticity and history, and you find that it's all happening over and over and over, and that it's refined my definition of economics down to a simple definition, and that is that economics is basically saying, hey, we've been here before, what happened next? And I don't think the economists get that. And I think they're so I think their math is distracting them. I think that they're not applying the smell test to the stuff they do. And so I think that's how central bankers are blowing it, right? They're forgetting that history shows you never print your way to prosperity, that you don't get out of messes you don't get deep into debt without a catastrophe at the end. And they somehow think, oh, yeah, but we're going to know how to do it. And
we'll grow out of it this time.
We'll grow out of it. Now, one industrialized country has grown out of a big debt, and that was Britain in the 19th century.
I saw the Big Short movie a couple nights ago. And, I think there's that outsider viewpoint like Michael Burry had coming at it as a medical doctor originally, where you almost not knowing what you don't know allows you to look at it with fresh eyes. You haven't been indoctrinated as much. I think that usually provides an interesting viewpoint.
Yeah, one of my and you can tell I love quotes. I just love quotes. I don't know why. I guess it's because some other person did the heavy lifting for me. One of my favorite that I put in there, and I just wedged it in because I love it so much, was the student in the back room, little girl drawing a picture, and the teacher says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher says, "No one knows what God looks like." And the girl says, "They will in a minute." And that hit me so deeply. I'm thinking that's the kind of naivete that causes you to go places, because you don't shut down ideas. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's great.
So question number 4, one of the things I noticed in the review that I always like is that you put your how you're positioned in your portfolio. And it kind of drives me crazy when you hear experts get on TV and talk about, different investments and ideas, but they never say how much of their own money they actually have invested in any of these ideas, if any. Maybe they're on the other side of the trade. Who knows? It kind of drives me crazy. when you don't know what conviction really is when the person's talking. But that's one of the things I like about yours. How come you're so willing to be transparent and show the personal skin in the game that you have?
And the beatings.
Well, yeah, but that's part of
So actually, there's some sort of simple and less flattering explanation to that, and that is when I first started writing this. So I did see messes from way back. I didn't see the energy crisis coming. I knew that the energy system was at risk of credit problems. I knew that. I never would have believed oil could get below 35. So I guarantee I didn't see that. I did see the dot-com bubble coming enough that I was completely out of equities, 100%. And I saw gold coming. I was buying gold aggressively in '99. It took 2 years for it to bottom, and I was feeling pretty crazy. I also have a 2002 email that I sent to a friend at Goldman that I rediscovered, in which I laid out the entire subprime crisis, including collapse of Fannie, collapse of Freddie, the whole subprime risk that was building up in the system. By the way, the knowledge of that started in the late 90s. It was that early in the process. But so when I started writing this thing in earnest back in 08, 09, somewhere in that, I would, at that point, since 2000, January 2000 to 08 or 09, I had a compounded growth of my personal wealth of 13%. It's not hard to imagine why that person would be transparent, right? Because everyone else had been crushed.
Yeah.
So then as the years went along and then gold turned against me, I still own it. I'm still buying it. I'm supposed to buy some today. I think it will have its day. I think that was just phase one. But as it turned against me, I would have liked to have taken my personal stuff out. But as it turned against me, I said, but I can't now because I have to fess up to that. And so I'm still totally womping the S&P, but the lead that I had has been narrowed. And I'm hoping the regression of the mean will get me back to being bold and cocky so for a couple of years in a row I've lost money. The crazy bulls are making money, so it hurts to put it up front, but I have to do it.
Well, I commend you for that. I mean, that kind of intellectual honesty is kind of rare.
I guess I'm pretty transparent. If you talk to my colleagues, they would tell you that Dave shows everything. Sometimes appallingly so. Sometimes a little too transparent. I'm pretty altruistic too. One of my colleagues once said, "Dave, I know you're willing to fall on your sword. Don't make us fall on ours." So, I really am transparent. I'm rather brash and not hiding stuff.
I like the boldness. So question number 5, and this relates to what we were just chatting about. You have roughly 20% or so of your net worth in precious metals. I find the fervor around gold, both for and against it, to be almost religious in nature sometimes. What are your thoughts about gold? And specifically about the, I'm curious to hear what you think about actual holding physical metal versus the financial, like GLD, let's say.
Yeah, I've moved towards physical, just for the record. And that is, so when I first bought gold, I bought it as an inflation hedge. A couple of years after that, around 2001, I started looking at energy as an inflation hedge. There are those who argue inflation is a completely incorrect call. I don't believe that, but I also don't believe it's, pure inflation or pure deflation. As this system has progressed forward, progress is a relative term, I guess, my faith the central bankers are going to make a major mistake is growing every year. And so, and as a consequence, therefore, owning gold as a hedge in some account somewhere has gotten to be less consequential than owning the physical, actually. I worry about asset confiscation. I worry about negative interest rates. I worry about civil forfeitures. These are not the rantings of wingnuts anymore. That's what Cyprus did to me. I mentioned earlier, they took the Cypriots' money. And I can't rule that out. So gold is increasingly important to me, not less so, even though it's been beaten up. I've quit listening to the gold bugs, the really crazy ones who are talking about it soaring here and there. But I look at the central bankers, and they look so reckless and so crazy. and you can make a case that we're right on path for a Weimar moment, even though people say, "Oh, the money velocity is dropping." Well, it did in Germany in the 30s, in the 20s too. And so, no, gold is till the central bankers grow a spine and start acting like Volcker. I'm going to own gold.
Yeah, that's it's such a tough question, the inflation versus deflation in my mind. And like I think maybe it's not a uniform thing potentially. Maybe it's
not
asset
right?
deflation in the things that you own and inflation in the things that you want to buy potentially.
Well,
the things that you need.
I said to you, "What's the weather?" And I gave the choice of rainy, snowy, or hot. You say, well, but there's other choices, and so I do believe we're going to have a collapse in the credit market again, and that's deflationary. And I do believe that could occur while you can't buy things very well; they get more expensive, and that's inflation. So I could imagine the double-edged sword killing us. I can imagine things we want cost too much money, and things that we own are going downhill fast, and the notion's binary is so wrong to me. And by the way, the MIT Billion Price Index is filled with holes. And I tried to get them to tell me how they filled the holes. And they said that's proprietary, which translates to me as they're full of crap. And they said it was proprietary. And the problem with a billion price, you say, well, how could that be wrong? It's a billion prices. I say, okay, so how do you statistically weight college education against a toothpick? Right? And so you have a billion prices. So what? A billion pieces of bad, unweighted data don't tell you anything. And so to the extent that healthcare and college and food and energy are a huge part of our lives, I don't care about the price of toothpicks. And I don't care about the price of Maseratis. And I don't care about any of that stuff. Our world is dominated by some very rapidly growing price tags. And our world is very much affected by some plummeting asset prices. And so, yeah, I think it's a crock actually. And there was rumor that they brought it out and it didn't follow the CPI and they retooled it. Excuse me, that's not science, that's fraud.
Yeah, I heard something about that too.
Well, if you have a source to that, please send it to me because I want that information. I want the evidence that they retooled it.
Yeah, well, when you think about kind of how we got here with the asset prices really rising pretty dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years, and technology generally being deflationary for most things that we're in our lives, that the government doesn't really get involved with. TVs, computers have seen incredible deflation the last 10 years. So it's not crazy to think that some of these things kind of swing back towards the mean, and sometimes you have to spend time on the other side of the mean, right? By definition.
Well, so here's a form of inflation I haven't talked about for a couple of years, but it's a huge one. And they hedonically adjust for windshield wipers working better and stuff like that. But the story I like to tell, and it tells a huge story, and that is I broke a blender one day. 40, 50-year-old blender, big, heavy thing, right? Break your foot if you drop it on it. And I broke it. And then I bought a new one, and it had more buttons, more speeds, more everything. And so the hedonic adjusters at the stats group would say, well, this blender not only costs $20, but it's got a lot more cool things, so it's really functionally $10. I would say yes, but the problem is it lasted 2 years. And my other one lasted 40. So if you want to do the price of a blender, you got to put in a factor of 20 in the durability. And now you think about your house, you think about how many microwave ovens you go through. And when you go to fix your car, it's not just a wire, it's not just a spark plug, it's a unit. It's an expensive unit. And how often do you fix things and how often do you throw things away? And so we're constantly buying things in a very, very accelerated cycle. How often do you buy a phone, a cell phone? You say, well, cell phones are great. Yeah, and you're buying one every 2 years, right? How do you factor that into the inflation, the cost of living? It's a big, big issue.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to be reflected in any of the hedonic adjustments. They all seem to go the other way.
They go the other way. They love to talk about all the buttons and stuff. They don't mention it's made of plastic and it can't be fixed.
Yeah, that's definitely been my experience. We end up throwing a lot of things away that it's like, man, I feel bad about it. It just seems so wasteful, but it just doesn't work anymore, and you can't fix it.
We have a cabin in the Adirondacks with a refrigerator from the 1930s. Right? Think how many years of service we got per dollar.
Yeah. Yeah, that amortized out nicely.
Yes, it did. And for the fact that it's not as good a fridge in terms of it doesn't make ice cubes, okay. But the cost per ice cube made in there is still pretty low now.
That's great. Well, Dave, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, and even more appreciate the effort that you put in to write such a great piece every year.
Well, I get emails, and it's those emails from guys like you that get me to keep doing it. So you'll get another next year by this model.
Ah, perfect.